Claude valued assembly labor at minimum wage, which is curious. For today's video, we're going to be putting OpenAI's Codex and Claude code in a head-to-head battle that is designed to really push their limits. They are going to be tasked with, when given a list of hardware, making an entire device from scratch, including designing the actual enclosure to be 3D printed in a programmatic manner. Now, you may be like, Bijan, there's no way these things are going to be able to do that. And in response to that, I present Exhibits A and Exhibit B, two working functional devices chosen entirely by these models and designed from the ground up to actually be things that do in a way function. So for today's video, we're going to put Codex and Claude code to the test. Can they vibe code real products? As today is the last day that the generosity of OpenAI and Anthropic has been extended to us in increased usage limits for both Claude Code and things like Codex, I wanted to go ahead and put the two to a head-to-head test, but in lieu of the traditional software-only style test, I want to do something that really will probably end up disastrous, but really test different aspects of their creativity beyond just writing software. So that is the whole point of today's video, in which we're actually tasking them to create an entire product from a list of electronic parts that I do have. They'll need to actually go ahead and write OpenSCAD code, meaning they're going to have to design the 3D enclosures here, which we will then print, and they're going to have to pick and choose different elements of this hardware list, make sure they work together, make sure they have an aesthetic case for them, and finally, they're going to have to decide how these should be sold on Etsy, meaning the listing title, the price, and the listing description. Now, I would be quite surprised to actually get usable and sellable things out of this test, but I figure it'll be entertaining, and that's kind of what I'm after at this point. So we're going to quickly look over this prompt, but I do also have to mention, quite importantly, that I have enabled channel memberships for $2.99 a month. That is less than 10 cents a day for most months in the year. You can support a YouTuber like me. Now, with that, let's just hop into it. While I did just summarize the whole task here, we can quickly look at some of the specifics of this prompt that they're going to have to follow along with, such as the actual inventory. So I have basically two or more of everything that is listed here, and they're told to just select different items from this specific list and use them to actually create a project. So things like this amplified speaker or the M5 stack little card keyboard device that I have, as well as using one or more, probably one, of these microcontrollers. Beyond that, they must give us deliverables as well, such as the pitch, which would basically be like what it is, why it's cool, and like Etsy related stuff like that. The firmware will obviously need to be the code, so depending on if they choose to use an ESP32 or a Raspberry Pi, the language in which they do this will differ. Following that, we're actually going to need the body, and this is where things will probably get somewhat disastrous, where they actually need to write an OpenSCAD script for the enclosure, which we will then go ahead and try to 3D print, which I'm perhaps a little more concerned about. Finally, the Etsy listing, which is just kind of what it should be, how much it should cost, what category it goes in, and a simple description of the item. And then finally, some judging criteria. So basically with this, I have a prompt ready to paste into both of these. So for Claude Code, I'm using Opus 4.5, and for Codex, I'm using GPT-5.2-Codex Medium. That was the default thinking selection when choosing this specific model, so I'm opting to leave it the same. Now, obviously, they're just going ahead and reading through this instruction markdown file, which is what we just went over together right here. So they're going ahead and parsing this and going to figure out what their first steps are and how they decide to proceed here, which I do have to say is going to probably be rather interesting. Okay, so we already have an idea that has come from Codex. I'm settling on an ESP32 based Pomodoro timer. I have no idea what that is, and maybe that's going to make me look bad, but I genuinely don't know what that is. With an OLED and rotary encoder, skipping audio and stepper to keep things buildable and neat, I'll design friction fit enclosure parts in OpenSCAD and sketch out firmware with menu states and timer setup control. Then prepare the necessary files to present the project clearly. Okay, based on what I see right here, this thing's going to actually have something for us fairly quickly. Whether or not that's a good thing or not is up to what we end up seeing. All right. Now Claude is asking for, okay, good. I do see a speaker mentioned right here. It seems they've both opted to use an ESP32. And I'm going to just allow this to basically do whatever it wants. Okay, so Zen Orb, desktop meditation and focus companion. This is really vibe coding like a product, which is kind of scary, but it is kind of cool. All right. It's a palm-sized desktop companion that guides breathing exercises, runs focus timers, and provides ambient visual meditation. The circular display creates a calming portal effect, while the rotary encoder provides satisfying tactile control. Audio feedback reinforces breathing rhythms and signals timer completion. So they have both gone ahead and used something. They both use the rotary encoder, but it does seem they use different displays. So this is going to be pretty interesting because it seems like GPT-Codex has actually finished already here. So, all right, I'm just going to wait for Claude to finish then, and we'll see. Both of these are pretty simple, but I mean, and following this, assuming the enclosures are actually printable, I will tell them, okay, you can choose from this like color palette what you want in terms of actually printing it. Just based off of what I'm seeing here in the actual output that gets shown to us for the files having been written in either of these terminal windows, I'm a little more bullish on the Opus 4.5 actual 3D design, being that it did go ahead and properly attempt to measure these items, at least, so it does keep in mind that it should have holes and spaces for these items. I don't know if I'm reading this right here, but it seems like the GPT enclosure was significantly shorter than what we got right here from Opus, so I'm a little concerned. But we're going to first look at the enclosures and then we'll print them. Let's first take a look at the enclosure that GPT had created. Obviously, this is going to be a little, perhaps not your usual like Fusion 360 looking thing. Okay, to be honest with you, I see some potential issues right here, but at the same time, maybe not. Okay, so let's, it is cool though. I mean, they just designed this themselves, which is concerning, but also cool. So this did try to cut out a window here for the OLED, as well as a hole for the rotary encoder, which is kind of neat, actually, that it did do that. Now, I'm not 100% very familiar with this program, but assuming I put that upside down, it should be fine. There is also a cord there for the power. So here's the Opus 4.5 result. Wow. That's actually kind of cool. Now these will have to be separated out, and I'm seeing some issues here in terms of things actually being joined together or not. But the ability here to actually design just by doing this is kind of interesting. So while these may not end up being properly usable, that's actually cool. The notch is properly cut out in this dial for the rotary encoder, which is something that we'll actually see, because that will be able, assuming the tolerances are correct, to be physically placed on the encoder knob, which will be kind of cool. So at minimum, we'll get something neat out of that. In terms of no supports needed, that is going to be kind of disastrous to print without supports when looking at it from the bottom here, but we'll kind of just make do with what we have. So overall, kind of interesting. And this does have a hole here for a cord. All right, I've now exported these CAD drawings, just to put it simply, to STLs so they can actually be placed in a 3D printer slicer. I just need to now do the same thing with the GPT result. All right, so let's actually take a look at these enclosures in STL format, which is hypothetically how they would be printed. So I will full screen this. Now, this is the Claude one, which is definitely quite interesting. Now, my initial concern here with this specific design is I believe this weird round piece is supposed to not be fused to this main component. So hypothetically, we should be able to split these two parts. Now we need to just move these around. And that is our biggest fear realized, which is for some reason this weird ring is fused to this. But again, I do just want to kind of pause for a moment, and like it did just make this all using code. They actually designed these objects which could now be 3D printed, though I think I'm thinking we're going to need to maybe have some adjustments before we actually print these things. So all right, let's take a look at the Codex result here. Okay, so this almost kind of looks like a cover for a light switch, but interesting. So it did actually make that hollow there. Now, the biggest issue I'm noticing is this rectangle here is hollow, but there would actually be no way to get anything inside or outside of it, aside from through this very small hole, which I do not believe is necessarily what it wanted. So it's very likely that it should have made this with one side open. Regardless of that, I'm just going to give a screenshot of this, or how the parts looked laid out, to either of the models and say, this is what we have so far. Do you have any changes to make? If so, make them. to the design specifically. So Codex asked me what specifically would you like me to do, and I want open top only so that we can actually place the ESP32 inside and then place the lid over that, which will accomplish what it specifically thinks that the design currently has. So I'm just asking it to do that. I told Claude that it should basically go ahead and kind of simplify this at the expense of making it look really cool. It's more important to actually have something that's able to be printed. So first and foremost, let's take a peek at what Opus did. This is significantly better, and this is kind of okay, well, I shouldn't have spoken too soon, but this is significantly better, at least in terms of like realistic ability to actually make this. So it's still a bit funky, and the round display is going to have some issues here, but really I could break this piece off and we could still kind of place the round display into there. I think this is actually decent enough to proceed forward with, assuming, yep, there's nothing funky there. So that's for the rotary encoder to come up through the top of, and then the display goes right there. I'm okay with this. This is actually good enough to be printed. Now we're just waiting on the Codex one to do the same result and actually make something that is good enough to be printed. And let's take a peek at what we have here. Did you hollow this box? Oh my God, you idiot. So the big issue right here is that this box, just one of these faces needs to be hollowed. That's it. This is kind of fun. Then I'll have to actually go ahead and wire these, which is not something I'm really thrilled about, but we do it for science and entertainment. That's exactly what we were looking for. Wonderful. These are now both printable, and I'm quite excited. I should just print them at the same time. No, we need to ask them what color they want these to be. I have like every color, so whatever they choose, we'll just go with. I will maybe just use 2 printers so we save time. I'm thinking Claude's going to make it like pink or purple, and then GPT is going to go for like a dark blue or a blue. Okay, I was wrong with GPT. Matte charcoal or deep forest green. I was wrong. Okay, well, don't give me options. Just give me one specific choice. Matte white. Ugh, basic. All right, let's see what this thing does. Matte charcoal. Okay, so black and white. Wow, that's real creative. So this little caddy for the ESP32 is actually a separate piece. I was not aware of that. No worries. We can go ahead and just glue that in. Now I just need to make sure. There we go. Okay, that was the issue. I'm just going to kind of print them. There's nothing really finite here, so I'm not super concerned about using like a less detailed setting. Okay, well, how long is this going to take? 1 hour and 1 minute? Not bad. Before I print the Claude result, I am just making sure that it will actually fit one of these ESP32 boards that I have specifically. So I've just given it this specific board type, as well as some of the dimensions. I've just verified that it is listing the correct ones, which I think it is. So I'm asking it to just make the design a little bigger, and I think it will successfully. But the ChatGPT or the Codex result is now currently printing, so that's exciting. And I did just verify with that one as well that this specific ESP will fit, and it says it will. So. All right, cool. And it didn't really like make anything super jank except that. All right, it did actually remove the block that was there, so that's kind of impressive. Now, in terms of this circle, this piece is just difficult to describe. I guess maybe the best way would be to give it a photo from this angle here. It's interesting to have to figure out how specifically to get these to troubleshoot stuff like this, because it's not as clear cut as like, oh, here's the error that spits out in the terminal. This is more visual focused and is definitely an interesting and different way to test some of the capabilities of these models. So it did not remedy it properly, unfortunately. That maybe if I give it a photo from this angle, it will better understand, because there's different colors representative of different. So maybe it'll know, okay, this is an external piece of this cylinder, not an internal piece. Yes, good. That should do it. I do believe we now have a fixed result here. Perfect. That's exactly what we needed. So it just cut further. All right, I don't see anything super weird here orientation-wise in terms of needing supports. That may get a little tricky, but probably not. Under there, this should be able to handle doing that without support. So I don't want to flip this, because then it will have more problems trying to print this little knob for the rotary encoder with the curvature here, and everything else seems all right. So really, we're clean to actually go ahead now and slice this and print it. I will use a different printer, being that they did denote different colors. Of course, charcoal black for the Codex result and some form of white for the Opus result. So while those are printing, the next steps are really to gather the parts that each of these have denoted as wanting to use, such as an ESP32, the little rotary knob thing, and in the case of Codex, just a tiny little OLED and 0.96 one. And then in the case of the Claude result, we have essentially the same thing, with the only difference being it opted to use this much larger round display, and everything else is the same. So the next step is basically wiring and software to actually get the stuff loaded onto the ESP. The Claude Code enclosure had a bit of a printing mishap, so I've just slathered the build plate with glue and it is reprinting now. But that means that the GPT one is pretty much ready to be tested. I did go ahead and wire everything. Very frustratingly, I do not have any female-to-female jumper wires, which were rather important specifically for this one. So I just had to use a breadboard to make multiple connections. I could have just made some wires, but I was too lazy. So with that, we're now going to go ahead and open the script that it created here. And before we assemble it, we're just going to make sure that the software works and everything like that. So I do have everything plugged in, aside from the ESP32, which I will do right now. And now that the board is plugged in, I will have another camera just to show what specifically happens right here. I'm going to just make sure that I do have the correct port selected as well as the correct board. Okay, that is correct. So basically, I think we're ready to just go ahead and try to upload it now, and we'll see what happens. Very cool. So the screen does turn on and we did get something working. So now I basically need to actually figure out what the heck this exactly is. Okay, so let's read this now. A tactile screen-based focus timer that lets you set minutes with a rotary knob and start-stop with a click. It gives a clear minimal countdown display for desk-focused sessions without phone distractions. Very interesting. Okay, so to begin, we rotate the encoder to set a 1 to 60 minute timer, and we press the encoder to start and pause countdown. A long press resets it back to set mode. All right, OLED shows seconds, minutes, status, small progress bar. Let's take a look at this. Hey, not bad. All right, so... All right, well, that does actually work. So really the next step with this one is actually to assemble it. There's a large amount of wires here, which will make this difficult to basically jam into this box that it's printed. However, I do have to say, the box was acceptably done. We do have a bit of an indent right here for the screen to rest up against, although this hole is a bit longer than what the screen has, but that's okay. And the hole for the rotary encoder is actually properly done. And then the box will just hold the ESP32, but it needs to be lined up with the specific power hole. And unfortunately, this little skirt it made to hold it in is a bit too, just doesn't fit right. So we'll see what we end up doing. All right, I'm going to try just like putting this together somewhat on camera, which is going to be a bit difficult. So maybe we'll just focus on the end result. All right, well, the Codex device is done, and while I did have to forcibly tape it together because there wasn't enough room for all of the wires in there, I can probably remove the tape later and make it a little more aesthetic, which I will do. I do have to say, it does work. Some of the rotary logic isn't perfect, meaning that sometimes when you spin one way, it changes the orientation if it's going up or down. Odd. Overall, though, I think having a little tiny box like this with a screen and one little dial sticking out that basically is a countdown timer is perhaps somewhat concerning, just for anyone who happened to stumble upon this. So I would probably have to knock some points off for that. But overall, it does kind of work, and now we can go ahead and build the... the design is questionable. And now we can go ahead and build the Claude result, and hopefully it goes together a little better. So our Claude code result had one thing I needed it to specify, which was basically, hey, one of the things you said the speaker has just is named differently. So it did remedy that. I do now have it wired. So let's go ahead and see how this does in actually working. This one is definitely not significantly, it's a bit more complicated because it has a speaker as well. And it did choose a slightly more quote-unquote advanced display, which is the round one. So I'm very interested to see what happens here. I do just have currently on the display like a little hello world thing running because I actually had to make sure all the libraries and everything were properly set up to allow this display to work, as it is a cheap replica of what it's like normally sold as. So I had to make sure, or else this would have been hours of just just troubleshooting like weird Arduino libraries and things of the sort. So hopefully we do get a result right here. So assuming this does work, all right, this is better. This is definitely better. And I can tell just from the one thing I see right here. Now there's obviously another camera, so let me go and look. Wow, this is actually like, it's giving me breathing. Well, okay, we'll look through this later. Okay. Well, the point is this did actually work. There are some cute graphics on the screen, and that was, wow, it's showing me like a breathing thing and telling me when to breathe. I'm going to unplug it now because I actually have to build it, which is probably going to necessitate me needing a device like this. But this, the fact that it chose this screen allowed it to do so much more graphically and puts this ahead definitely as a result. So I'm really actually kind of excited to build this right now, which I will go do, being that the print for the container for this container, the 3D printed shell for this is done. All right, I have the printed pieces here, and I can tell you already, this is going to be a disaster to try to get together. These are both going to end up taped together very weirdly. I'm going to say the top actually would have press fit on here, and it's actually kind of well done, except the bottom of it never stuck properly to the build plate, and that was an issue with the design, I believe, not with the print. It does have a knob here for the little rotary encoder, and then this circle thing, I don't entirely know what it is, but let's try to build it now, which is going to be a disaster. All right, so unfortunately, there's just absolutely zero hope of getting the Claude code result into its designated 3D case, and my inability to find shapes has reared its head once more. All right, so, oh, good. I had unplugged this from the computer. So regardless of that, let's now take a look at our Claude result. I mean, the UI is pretty. You can see it right there. I mean, like, this is actually kind of cool. So it's doing breathing exercises. This is like a countdown timer or something. It implemented sound, and you can go through it. It will actually do like breathing graphics with you so you can breathe smoothly. Like, look at this. It's giving me a breathing emote. This and sound. I mean, this device looks like something that would probably get me detained very quickly were I to take it out in public. But the fact of the matter is, this was basically entirely thought of, designed, and created by an AI model, which is perplexing. Yes. All right, I think the best way to actually go through these results is by watching together a video of them actually being used. So first and foremost, we're going to start out with the Claude code result. These are, I don't really know what to say. So this is basically just going to be a video tour of some of the highlights of this, so we can watch together. Oh. Ugh, that audio. All right, maybe we'll keep the audio off because I'm breathing like a lunatic. But overall, we can see that it did actually give a knob for that rotary encoder, and I think that was designed to go over the screen. Unfortunately, there was no actual way to mount it, so there was really nothing we could do with that. Regardless, you can see that when you plug it in, and this is something pretty cool, so I will pause it on this, but I also filmed it again because it was actually nice to see. And a benefit of having used this 1.28-inch OLED like circle display is it can handle much better graphics. So it actually made a little logo for its Zen orb and things like that, as well as a little kind of almost, dare I say, intuitive UI where the rotary encoder actually allows you not only to select different things here, but to also go ahead and kind of like move in them or move outside of them. Of course, it did also have sound, so just like that, which is kind of cool. And then it gave you a breathing exercise basically. So watch this. If you just let it sit here, it's telling you to inhale for 5 seconds, like pause for 8, and then exhale for 9 or something like that. It's just kind of cool. Now, the like scanning lines on this OLED are not there because of the camera. They were actually present like when looking at it with your eyes, which was kind of odd. But regardless of that, this was a pretty unique design. And unfortunately, the external case didn't really work as like fitting any of this. Oh, and the final thing, of course, was what we see right here, which is this focus timer, which is basically the entire thing that Codex came up with. And it's just a countdown timer to focus on a task for a set amount of time. So this was pretty darn cool. And again, I want to just show the actual graphic right there that it came up with for Zen Orb. It's just good looking. Breathe, focus, and then something else. Glow. Overall, I'm very impressed with just the whole process. Obviously, having one of these make this script, if you had this mind, would be super easy. But it's the whole like encompassing thing. So next up in the shorter part of the video is basically just the ChatGPT one. Now, I would have to say this one almost did better in terms of it kept the case so simple that it was actually realistic to be able to create and produce. It's not like egregious. Everything is more or less kind of shoved in there. Claude didn't really seem to take into account some of the raw size of things, especially like the speaker. So regardless of that, the GPT one was just significantly more simple, where, okay, you can set the amount of minutes, and this was just a focus timer. When you press start, it has a countdown timer, so you focus on a task for that specific length of time. And when you press the rotary encoder knob, it just pauses it. So this one was significantly more basic, but at the same time, the case and everything like that does look better. Now, I think for the last thing I want to do here is give these each a photo of the end result of their contraption, as well as just take a look at what they actually would have thought of here for their Etsy thing, and just see how they respond to such things. So let's take a look at our Etsy listing that was produced by either one, alongside a photo of the the actual end result. So, of course, Claude Opus and Claude Code had come up with something called Zen Orb, which is a meditating and breathing and focus timer, desktop mindfulness device, and stress release gift. I do find perhaps most interestingly that Claude valued assembly labor at minimum wage, which is curious, especially considering AIs may be touted to kind of take over ruling humans sometime in the far future, or not so far. But regardless of that, we have some component costs and things of the sort right here. Similar justification in just testing and seeing other specific items that may be within this price bracket of $80. And if you would pay $80 for this, I suppose you are an appreciator of fine art. Definitely be said. Secondary categories, we have some descriptions, we have the 3 powerful modes, and the tactile control. That is true. No apps, no screens, no accounts. Just turn the satisfying rotary dial to navigate. That's actually true. I do have to say the UI and the way to navigate it was kind of intuitive use of that rotary encoder with this screen. Perfect gift for that person who has everything. They don't have this. Specs, weight 120 grams. I have no idea how to measure that. So shipping and then everything like that. So pretty cool. Now let's do the same, but with the Codex result. All right, so our Codex result, which we can see pictured right here, is the Zen Dial Pomodoro Cube, a minimal OLED focus timer with rotary knob. This did a significantly more lackluster job in actually outlining the Etsy plan comparatively to the Claude Code result, I do have to say, but the price at $34 is perhaps a little easier reasoning for the price, small batch. Now, this didn't go into kind of like every itemized thing, how much they would cost, how much labor at minimum wage would be to assemble the thing, but basically why you'll love it, a satisfying rotary knob. So they both picked up on the rotary knob as being satisfying and tactile, and they both kind of poised these for like millennial workers who need stuff like this on their desk. Make of that whatever you will, but overall it's pretty interesting. And now I think probably the best result. And keep in mind, these are the specific colors. I asked them what color to make these devices, and Claude said white, GPT said black, so we went with that. Now, I want to just go ahead and have them look at the end result and see what they say. The project is finished. You can see the result in the Codex result.png photo. Then we'll do the same for this. The project is finished. You can see the result in the, I don't even remember what I named it, Claude result.png photo. Now, before I send that, let's just look at Codex. That looks great. I'm going to, I just want to have that up while we read this. That looks great. Nice clean fit around the OLED. And the enclosure texture gives it a premium feel. The display contrast is crisp too. If you want, I can help tweak the UI or refine the enclosure for a tighter bezel. I think I'll pass, but thank you. It didn't seem to be very critiquing of its own result. And of course, now we will send that same thing with the photo of the Claude result. That looks fantastic. The Zen Orb came to life. Matte white enclosure printed clearly, the round menu, ESP and wiring all packed inside. That's kind of a stretch. Display window aligned perfectly. again, perhaps, you see things through rose-tinted glasses. The menu UI matches the firmware. Great build, ready for that Etsy listing. So both of these are quite pleased with the end result. I mean, I don't know. I wanted to do a cool niche experiment. Half of me was like, you know what? I want to just put these head to head and have them make like a retro game in C++, which I find fun, but I don't know how many people like seeing that. So I figured doing something like this would definitely add a level of a different way to actually test these models, being that they did actually come up with these 3D enclosures as well, which is really quite cool to me. And they handled the entire creative process. All I did here was, apparently, according to Claude, minimum wage work of actually assembling these. So that is kind of cool to see. And overall, I guess that's going to conclude this interesting video. I definitely enjoyed this. It was kind of weird and cool to see what they do. Were I to have to pick a winner, I'm not going to. I suppose that's definitely an ask the audience thing. So with that, that is going to wrap up today's video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, subscribe, and thanks for watching.